Hey, Brent with Sellerplex here. Today I'm going to take you through understanding incrementality, something that's extremely important for us on the DSP side and is becoming increasingly important on the sponsored ads side. So let's start with the definition. We've all been trained by Amazon to look at high ROAS inside of campaigns, whether they be DSP or sponsored ads, and just feel good about it. Like, oh, the ACoS is low, or the ROAS is 3.5 times or 4 times. And to be honest, it's very easy to find an attractive high ROAS with Amazon DSP if you're just running basic retargeting or remarketing. Incrementality is a reality check. This is to see if advertising is an extra expensive step in the sequence of someone making a purchase, or if it's a critical piece, a stepping stone on that path to purchase. What incrementality attempts to measure is the additional sales generated by advertising compared to what would have happened if advertising was not present. It's trying to answer this core question of, did the campaign create or capture new demand? Another way to frame incrementality is the but-for test. That is to say, if not but for this advertisement, would the sale have been made? So it's kind of inverting the principle and turning it on its head. Incremental growth is what happens when an ad reaches somebody that didn't know your brand previously or is purchasing from another brand and now has come back to your brand. And then we convince them to buy with those ads. But like many things in life, incrementality is not black or white, right or wrong, 1 or 0. It really exists on a spectrum. And in the industry, we call this the incrementality gradient. On the left side here, we have the generation of new demand. So advertising that is purely just generating new demand, purely reaching new shoppers who are unfamiliar with the brand. And I like to kind of symbolize this with like a spark plug or a spark, right? You're creating desire, you're sparking an interest in someone. And on the opposite side, we have advertising that is just simply taking credit for inevitable sales. Someone who was already going to make the purchase. I like to represent this by a toll booth. So they're already traveling on the road of commerce to your products. And the ads are basically just the place where you as the brand are paying to get them to go somewhere they're already headed. The reality is for most advertising on Amazon, it falls somewhere between these two extremes. You wouldn't see a campaign that is purely generating new demand or one that is 100% taking credit for inevitable sales. And part of what we're doing with this video is trying to dismantle this notion, take it apart, examine it, and see how we can actually make sense of this. So to illustrate this point a bit further, let's look at some example purchasing scenarios that are incremental or not incremental. And the first example that's incremental, let's just pretend somebody is watching a streamer on Twitch and they see a DSP ad for an at-home espresso machine that's a couple $100. This is something that they're interested in, but they weren't aware of the brand. They didn't know about this specific model. And now they've been made aware of it. Maybe they click on the ad, maybe they don't, because it's display advertising after all, but they're now aware of it. They've seen it, right? It's been registered in their conscious mind. Sometime later, they go on Amazon, maybe they click some ads for that same brand, maybe they don't, but ultimately they end up putting it in their cart and then buying. That would be a great example of incremental additional ad spend because it has found a net new customer and has brought them into the fold, brought them into the brand. In the second example, let's say that someone is already buying Tide Pods and has roughly every 30, 45 days they're buying them. They're not subscribed and saved on Amazon, but they just buy them when the need arises and they think about it. Now, they're browsing a CNN website and they see an advertisement that's maybe retargeting them from DSP, and it says, buy these Tide Pods, you need to refresh your supply. Someone has done a good job of targeting that person, but they're already a customer, so them making another purchase was not necessarily bringing someone new into the brand. It was just simply reminding them. In DSP, it's fine to run these efforts, and we call them loyalty efforts, but we have no expectation of them being a net new customer. So this is not incremental. Now let's take a look at some of the most common category or campaign types that you experience on Amazon and how incremental they are or are not, depending on a couple factors. The first one I'll highlight here is brand defense. So most brands on Amazon are running a form of brand defense campaigns, whether that be in sponsored ads, most likely, or occasionally on DSP. And what you're usually advertising for here is keywords that are your brand name or contain your brand name. Let's say Nike running shoes is a good example of one that contains it. But if someone was searching for like a specific model of Nike shoes, then that would be considered straight up like brand term with no additional keywords surrounding it. The expectation here for most advertisers would be to have a low incrementality on these campaigns. These are people that already know your brand. They are searching for you by name. The reason to run these kind of campaigns on Amazon would simply be to defend the territory that you perceive as your own on the marketplace and try to defend against other brands muscling in on that territory and finding customers that are searching for you and trying to divert them to their own brand. The second category here is what we call category targeting. So this would be broader terms that do not contain brand terms or just category-based targeting. So someone that's browsing laundry detergent pods, for example, with the Tide we just talked about, or someone that's searching for a generic high-level keyword, but it doesn't include Tide, for example. The incrementality here can be medium or high, kind of depending on the relevance and specificity of the term. There's a bit of wiggle room here. So this is the category of campaigns that you have to be examining more closely to determine incrementality. And I would say the cannibalization risk is medium to low. You're competing with the wider market in some cases, but in other cases, you're turning over search terms that are very closely related to your brand. Our third category here is actually the inverse of the one we talked about first, so conquesting. This means you are setting up campaigns in order to reach out and find shoppers that are searching for a competitor brand. You're going after them directly. These usually have a higher cost of acquisition and maybe a higher cost per click because you're going up against these brand names. But the likelihood of incrementality here of new customers is quite high. The shopper was searching for a rival brand. They weren't looking for you. You're trying to divert them from that course and bring them to your brand. Our last category or type of campaign can be in both sponsored ads and DSP, although for the purposes of this video, we're usually talking more about DSP, but let's call it awareness campaigns. So we're looking at interest categories or lifestyle or demographic. And this is oftentimes display ads or video, increasingly audio too, for that matter on DSP. So incrementality here is very high. And the cannibalization risk, AKA the risk that someone who would have made the purchase otherwise is caught by the ad, is lower. The shopper in many cases has never heard of you. Going back to the coffee machine found via Twitch streaming we saw earlier, that person in the example had never even heard of that brand or seen that particular model. But now the seed had been planted. They had a memorable ad impression for something they were interested in. Maybe they were in the right lifestyle category of someone that moved and was looking for a new coffee machine. Maybe there's someone that's in the interest category of a coffee enthusiast. These are the kind of targeting you can do with DSP, for example. So now that we've got a very complete understanding of what incrementality is and is not, let's revert back to this concept of ROAS and why in 2026, the sole metric of ROAS, looking at that and nothing else, is simply no longer enough. It's not useful. ROAS is really designed to understand ad efficiency, but it does not show causality. What has actually caused or led to this situation? High ROAS, it looks good, it feels good. Amazon has trained us to like high ROAS, as have many other performance marketing close to the point of purchase platforms, like Facebook, like Google. But what is often happening is branded search is captured by this advertising. It's inflating the supposed impact. And even though the ROAS looks high, we're not really getting incremental new to brand, new shoppers in. So ROAS is not designed to and cannot explain if advertising has convinced a shopper to buy or whether the shopper would have converted without seeing that ad. It's just not capable of answering the question, what would the sales look like if ads were not running? So if ROAS isn't useful, how can we assess incrementality? I'll start off with a quick reminder though, which is that Amazon advertising by default is last touch attribution. So whatever ad was the last one to touch the shopper before they made the purchase is the one that gets credit. And click always takes priority over view. So if an ad is clicked, that one will get priority instead of one that was just simply viewed. And another important reminder is that revenue through Amazon DSP is counted on the day that it occurs. So if someone makes a purchase, that is the day when it shows up as revenue and is attributed to a DSP order or line item. But in sponsored ads, when a click occurs and then there's a purchase that occurs, even if it's a day or two later, the revenue is attributed to the initial action that took place. So if the click occurred on a Thursday and then someone added it to their cart it sat there Friday, they didn't check out until Saturday, that revenue is attributed to Thursday, not Saturday. In DSP, it would be on Saturday. So it's important to understand the difference of attribution between the two major platforms and how that can create some interesting situations with reporting when talking about when things happened and the timeline and who gets credit in terms of what advertising campaign. So the first method we're using to determine incrementality is AMC, Amazon Marketing Cloud, which continues to be the most useful analytics platform for resolving these kind of questions, or at least getting a few steps closer to understanding them. The first example we're using here is path to purchase. So this is actually just the default module inside of AMC for path to purchase, although you can run AMC queries that will give you much more detailed and more in-depth, longer time frame data. This is data from a real account, so this is not doctored or manipulated in any way. But notice that what I've done here on the left is looked at top 5 conversion paths. I've ranked it by new to brand sales, and new to brand in Amazon parlance is typically 13 months. So if someone has not purchased in the last 13 months, they are considered new to brand. This can be manipulated with AMC, but by default, just know that that's generally what new to brand means. And I've just looked at all the different ways that this brand, which is using sponsored ads, sponsored brands, DSP, a whole variety of advertising products, is finding purchases. So the number one way is just people click on sponsored ads 2 times, and then they end up purchasing. But in the second largest conversion path, which is sponsored products several times, followed by display, which is Amazon DSP in this case, several times, and then subsequent purchase, because we're running a series of retargeting and loyalty campaigns for this brand, in addition to mid and upper funnel. But when we originally started, we started with that lower funnel and started to build our way up. You can see that that's where the last credit is given and the last touch is. So the third biggest, which is now growing in this account, is display. In this case, 7 times. So they're seeing a lot of display ads. We're hitting them with video, we're hitting them with mid-funnel, we're hitting them with creative that is a bit more open-ended or category-based. We're assuming these people are not yet familiar with the brand. And then eventually they're going to Amazon and they are clicking on sponsored products when they search or find that same brand, and then they're purchasing. So what this is helping us do is right in the name, path to purchase. What path are shoppers taking? And are these steps critical on the path? Are they totally necessary? Or can we remove some of them and then take that budget and put it somewhere else? Or should we reinvest in other areas? Should we find out what's working well and turn up the spend on those areas? This can help us understand these questions. And the point of path to purchase is not that there's any one correct answer. It's that we can analyze this by all the different pathways. We can filter by things like new to brand. We can filter just by raw sales. There's several ways to do it, but it helps us understand what steps are critical and what steps are potentially extraneous and where we can invest more or where we're currently over investing. The second example I have here on the right is just new to brand sales, but this time I've included DSP in all the steps. So we're looking at a smaller subset of data and trying to figure out where it fits in. You will notice that we have an interesting mix of the third largest here is display 6 times. So there are people that are purchasing. It's not many of them, but some of them are new to brand, 14% according to this here, who are just seeing DSP ads 6 times and then they're going on to purchase. Great. So we're making sales just from DSP alone. Maybe those people are clicking at the end, maybe they aren't, but this helps us take the DSP influence and drill into that a bit further and understand what it's doing. The most key metric to look at here for path to purchase is path new to brand sales. Sponsored products are seeing a very large percentage. This is, of course, the vast majority of ads sales that we're driving in the account because the spend there is tremendous. But DSP is also seeing a very respectable percentage. And we're always trying to work to increase that and figure out what levers, what targeting, what audiences we can do that with that still are within budget and are reasonable for us to reach at some kind of scale. So we're happy to see things like 60% new to brand or 23 in some cases here, depending on how the ads are combined and stack up. Another AMC data set that we've used with great success trying to figure out incrementality is first touch versus last touch. This is an attempt to understand what impact DSP has at the beginning of a shopper's journey versus the end. In this particular account, we're shifting more towards a mid and upper funnel approach So we're trying to shift more of the attributed sales and conversions to first touch away from last touch, which would be more of the retargeting, remarketing we talked about earlier. We added in sponsored ads, first touch and last touch, just for a comparison here to see how they stack up. And that will help us determine which of these efforts is incremental versus which is not adding anything new in terms of customers. Since we're messing with how the attribution works in this scenario, the numbers that you see as attributed sales and conversions across these different channels will not add up to the total that you see inside your account. Do not expect them to perfectly add up together. What we're doing is shifting how we attribute credit to the different ad models and seeing how that shifting of credit will impact the numbers. Another way we try to assist incrementality is looking at assisted sales. So this is an examination of our DSP orders, some of which were created for Black Friday, Cyber Monday, some of which are retargeting, some of which are lookalike audiences, people that have viewed competitor storefronts. They're all across the funnel. And this is a measurement of assisted sales. Assisted sales can be explained with a very simple sports analogy. Imagine in any sport, whether it's football or anything else, the person who kicks the ball or throws the ball to the person that ultimately scores the touchdown or puts the ball in the back of the net. They are the one who gets the assist, right? That's marked down in all the sports data books as an assist. And that is essentially what we're looking at with these campaigns. So who got the sale ultimately is not what we're looking at here. We're looking at the campaign that contributed to that final sale and was the one that set up the final campaign to score the goal, so to speak. You can see from this recent data that we had a lot of action on Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and we were looking at frequent shoppers and existing customers. So of course, those orders would have a huge amount of assisted sales. They were setting up other campaigns to actually make the sale. You'll look at the bottom and we have the lead-in pool or people that are contextual targeting. Those would have a very small amount of assisted sales because they're simply higher up the funnel and they are targeting people that are at the beginning of the journey, not so much towards the end. You would expect to see that more with the retargeting and lower funnel ones. Another important metric here is reach. So reach would be the unique people actually found by this campaign. So how many unique individuals saw it? It's possible that they saw the ad 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, but each one of those would be counted as an impression or a viewable impression, whereas each person would be a unique person that was reached. All these metrics are those we take into account when looking at incrementality and impact of DSP on incrementality. And for our last AMC assisted data point that we used to assess incrementality, we look at exposure sequence. So in what order were shoppers exposed to the various ads we have out there? There's 4 categories here, the top one being sponsored ads only, which obviously has the biggest amount of ad spend because the budget in this particular data set in this particular account is quite large. But then we have sponsored ads, then DSP, which you'll notice is quite large also because we're doing a lot of retargeting for this account initially. But the one that's growing and we hope to continue to grow is DSP, then sponsored ads. So we're getting a really good picture on what the sequence of events is here between this and path to purchase. And you can see the ROAS for that is extremely high. And the new to brand purchase rate is almost 48%, which we're also very happy with and would love to continue in that direction. DSP only has a very low ROAS because the point of DSP in many cases is not to make the sale, it's to fill the funnel and to set up the sale for the other components in the holistic advertising account. So with this, it allows us to see what is incremental, what is not, what is driving new to brand, which is the number one thing we're concerned with when we're talking about incrementality. So here are 2 more traditional test methods that are more widely applicable to things beyond just Amazon DSP and Amazon advertising. The first one is the gold standard. This is the classic. It's called the holdout test. Quite simply, you break your advertising into 2 pieces. One is the group, that's the test group that sees the ads, and the other one is the holdout group. This group goes dark. They don't see ads. And then after usually 2 to 4 weeks, sometimes longer, depending on the velocity and quantity of your spend, you just compare the difference between these 2 groups. So if the test group has more sales, that percentage lift difference between those 2 is what the ads are responsible for. Within Amazon, the biggest hurdle to running this is there's really no inbuilt simple facility to say, I would like to run a holdout test. And there's also the notion of opportunity cost, where If I'm not running ads, I'm not making sales, I'm not helping the BSR, I'm not helping the rank of my product for particular keywords or categories or against certain competitors. So to run a true test, you really need to have ads stop showing on a portion of your audience. And this is quite hard to manage with Amazon. It's easier to do on other platforms, but this is the gold standard in terms of incrementality testing. And our final test is what we call the cannibalization check. So if you look at your total sales, that is organic plus ad revenue, and you find that your ad sales have increased a lot while your total sales have only increased by a much smaller percentage, that difference may be what you are cannibalizing from your organic sales by putting ads in front of people that would have already purchased. So you're spending more, you're earning more on ads, but your overall revenue is staying relatively the same or only increasing by a little bit. Your ads are finding shoppers that may already be headed to checkout. So this is another good indicator from a very top-down perspective. We're not looking at the sequence of campaigns or new to brand like we talked about with AMC, but this is giving us an overall warning indicator to look at. So if you'd like to talk more about incrementality with me or talk about DSP and incrementality, please find a booking link in the description below, and I'm happy to talk to you. Thanks for watching.